Imagine you're the head of Lucasfilm, an industry behemoth with virtually limitless resources, underwritten by the might of the Disney Corporation, and featuring some of the most beloved intellectual properties in the history of Western culture, whose themes and spirit are timeless and universal, with beloved characters and motifs, and imbued with a beguilingly innocent charm that above all made audiences happy. You're overseeing the entertainment franchise Star Wars, Indiana Jones, even Willow, an easier layup than LeBron James shooting hoops with a drowsy, wheelchair-bound kid from the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Now consider Kathleen Kennedy's last couple of days at Lucasfilm. 1. The ludicrously overpriced Star Wars Galactic Cruiser Hotel closes. 2. The obnoxiously poor-quality reboot of Willow is erased from Disney Plus as a cost-cutting measure. And 3. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny receives lackluster reviews. At Cannes, where even Two Girls, One Cup would probably receive a rousing 14-minute-long ovation, came the following account. The film's elaborate action scenes and one-liners delivered by Waller-Bridge received a less than rapturous response inside the theater. During parts of the 142-minute film, audience members could be heard whispering out of boredom in French. How many times does Kathleen Kennedy need to fail before Disney gets rid of her? She took a $4 billion franchise and made it fade and wither into banality. Then she brought in Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who left scuff marks over the James Bond franchise, to play a significant part in leaving the Indiana Jones franchise faded and withered into banality. There's a lesson in Kathleen Kennedy's failure. Prior to taking the helm at Lucasfilm, her greatness was as a facilitator, as a multitasker. With Kathleen Kennedy, there has never been any particular evidence of creativity, and Disney has to create things. It has to instill them with magic. If you have no particular creative drive, if you're not particularly adept at telling stories, then the only remaining means of expressing yourself will be through the ways stories are told. This has always been the issue with Kennedy, who has found insertions of her own interests and perspectives, even wish fulfillment, a stand-in or substitute for her creative sterility. If you can't make a compelling creative impact, you can still make a socio-cultural one, not in writing narratives, but in shaping them, forefronting identity and cultural issues, an indulgent proxy control. Despite a few late bumps and the griping in some corners of YouTube, which from the point of view of her admirers could be viewed as a sign of her resilience and authenticity, the assumption has been, up till now, that Kathleen Kennedy was going out on a high note after a storied and illustrious career. But even in the mainstream, this assumption surely must be being tested. Look at the current state of play, and then hold up her performance to any criteria. Fan enthusiasm and respect for the Star Wars legacy? Many fans are checked out and jilted. Scrupulously maintained standards of production of Star Wars properties? The quality of screenwriting and dumbed-down nonsense of cameos, under-explained plot contrivances, and sheer volume of product would say no. Innovation and risk-taking? Not when it's relying on legacy characters like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Boba Fett and dodgy AI replicas of Luke Skywalker and strip mining the franchise to rehash all its nostalgia, and then announcing one of your new films is just going to default back to the character of Rey from the previous trilogy, a character the fan base was generally only lukewarm towards and whose character arc wasn't especially all that compelling to begin with. If the criteria is critical reception, the responses to the Star Wars products has been mostly in a range from dismal to fair to middling. The last two installments of the sequel trilogy divided critics, with The Rise of Skywalker especially panned, and the Willow remake was trashed in reviews. While the Rotten Tomatoes scores are frothing around a little, the overall impression is of spiritless mediocrity, with Variety describing Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny as a dutifully eager but ultimately rather joyless piece of nostalgic hokum, with none of the ingeniously staged kinetic bravura of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Whose idea was it to release this film this far in advance with reaction embargo lifted? It would be interesting to see the test screening scores that justified this decision. If Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny fails, or even limps into a less than respectable position, Disney should fire Kathleen Kennedy. If the criteria is long-term planning and the bigger picture, then she fails here too, as The Force Awakens, it later turned out, wasn't backed up with any particular storytelling arc, And instead, Rian Johnson wrenched the trilogy off course, left it in a confused, ambiguous position, and then left J.J. Abrams with the hot potato in his lap of trying to make some kind of salvageable story to round things off. A series of ad hoc, contrived, and intensely unsatisfying choices that should never have eventuated. Also, in terms of structured and composed planning, the churn of possible, rumored, rejected, and overlapping prospective film ideas dragged on for years, with no cohesion or efficiency, with the fanbase getting habitually splattered with warm streams of urine from the endless pissing in the wind. If the criteria is overseeing front of house, merchandising, and public attractions, then it's hardly stellar if your feature attraction, Star Wars Galactic Starcruiser, closes down less than 19 months after opening. Clearly it wasn't a good strategy to charge around $5,000 for a 2-night stay for 2 people, on top of travel expenses and anything else that tourists might want to do in the area. Late last year, reports suggested that the hotel was struggling with falling demand and was seeing occupancy rates of as little as 25%. During Kathleen Kennedy's tenure as head of Lucasfilm, Star Wars was divested of its magic and became commodified. When Kennedy brought in George Lucas for a private screening of The Force Awakens, Lucas couldn't hide his disappointment. "There's nothing new," he said. She then took out some of the essential elements of the franchise, removing all relationships, sensuality, and sexuality, leaving it benign. She then flooded the market with a Han Solo film that bombed due to indifference and an overly congested schedule. She championed a female lead with no particular flaws or character arc, who was overpowered and underwritten and therefore unengaging. With her approval, legacy characters were portrayed in an unflattering light, with unsatisfactory resolutions. Now, Indiana Jones has been reduced to a dismal pastiche, an ersatz version of something once wonderful and enlivening. I don't hate Kathleen Kennedy, and neither should anyone else. I respect Lucas and Spielberg's unyielding trust in her, and her decades of work and production credits. Spielberg would find a problem, look at her, and simply tell her to take care of it. Finding writers, production crews, artists, whatever it was often in her charge. That grace under fire and level-headedness was what made Kennedy George Lucas's first pick to take over Lucasfilm when he left. But what's become evident is that Kennedy was at her best in that in-the-trenches capacity, being at the behest of and clearing a path for the auteurs she was working with. Helping to bring the visions of others to life has suited her immensely, but she's no creative visionary in her own right, and putting her in the tower at the top with unfettered control has turned out poorly. The desire for it not to be so, among so many, has almost masked the reality that it is so. Kathleen Kennedy has to go.